I didn't like it, but it didn't stop me from playing, he said. I just played the way I played emotionally. Ringo Starr was always the funny Beatle, the one who smiled and joked while John and Paul got all the attention. But now that he's 84, he's dropping a bombshell that no one saw coming. Behind that happy face was a man who drank so much that he blacked out, attacked his wife in a drug-fueled rage, and abandoned his kids. Even worse, he almost died twice, and no one knew about his secret health crisis or the violent incident that sent him to rehab. Ringo Starr was born Richard Starkey on July 7, 1940, in a small house at 9 Madron Street in Liverpool's Dingle district. His parents, Richard Starkey Sr. and Elsie Glee Starkey, worked hard to support their family. His father had been a dock worker before becoming a baker, and his mother worked in a bakery. Life was already hard, but it got even worse when his father left the family when he was only 3 years old. To make ends meet, his mother worked as a maid and then as a barmaid. She did everything she could to make ends meet and always looked out for her son, Ringo, who had one health problem after another. When he was 6, he had surgery for appendicitis, but the procedure turned into something much worse. He got peritonitis, a dangerous infection that spread through his body. He fell into a coma and spent a year recovering at Myrtle Street Children's Hospital. Just as he was starting to catch up with school, he got sick again. When he was 13, he caught a virus. He was diagnosed with tuberculosis, a disease that killed thousands of people in England every year. He was sent to a sanatorium where he stayed for 2 years. Being stuck in bed for so long meant he fell behind in school, but it also gave him an experience that would change his life. To keep the kids entertained, the hospital staff set up music sessions where Ringo learned to play drums and maracas and hit colored dots on them. He didn't know it at the time, but this would become his love of drumming by the time when he got better, school didn't seem important anymore. He had missed too much and was having a hard time catching up. At 15, he dropped out without any qualifications and, like most working-class boys in Liverpool, went straight into the workforce. He had a number of different jobs, including a short time with British Rail, before landing a job as a machinist. It was steady work, but he wasn't really interested in it. Ringo Starr's career in music began in 1957, when he and his neighbor Eddie Miles formed the Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group. Skiffle was popular in Britain at the time. Simple instruments like washboards and tea chests were used instead of drums and bass guitars. Ringo found his own way to keep time by tapping a thimble on a washboard. The band played local gigs and quickly became popular. Songs like Walking Cane and Rock Island Line made them a hit in Liverpool. They even played at the Cavern Club, a place that would become famous in Beatles history. Ringo made his debut there on July 31, 1957. That Christmas changed everything. Gave him his first drum kit, which was just a snare drum, a bass drum, and a makeshift cymbal. But it was enough for the band. They sounded better with a real drummer, and their popularity grew. By early 1958, the skiffler craze was dying down, and American rock and roll was taking over. The Eddie Clayton Skiffle Group broke up, and Ringo was left looking for his next step. In November 1959, Rory Storm and the Hurricanes needed a drummer. They were one of Liverpool's best rock and roll bands, and they were more polished. Ringo became Ringo Starr after the rings he always wore and his love of country music. Rory Storm gave him a special time on their shows called Star Time, where he could sing, and he did songs like Boys by the Shirelles, which added to his growing stage presence. The Hurricanes weren't just popular in Liverpool, they played all over. In early 1960, they got a residency at Butlin's Holiday Camp in Wales, where they made £25 sterling a week, which was a good living. By October, they were playing at the Kaiser Keller Club in Hamburg, Germany. The Beatles were also there, but the Hurricanes were the bigger band at the time. That's where Ringo met John Lennon, Paul McCartney, and George Harrison. During that residency, Ringo filled in for the Beatles drummer Pete Best one night and recorded Summertime with John Paul George, Rory Storm's bassist Lou Walters, and George Harrison. It was the first time Ringo played with the people who would later become his band. The Beatles will never forget those nights in Hamburg. Ringo's drumming stood out, and his laid-back personality fit right in. Pete Best, on the other hand, had a hard time connecting with the rest of the band by mid-1962. It was clear they needed a change. Best's drumming didn't fit with their evolving sound, and his distant attitude made things worse. On August 15, 1962, John Lennon and Paul McCartney drove from Liverpool to Pabble Healy to find Ringo. They offered him £25 a week to join the Beatles. Initially, he was hesitant because he was loyal to the Hurricanes, but he knew the Beatles had something special, so he took a chance. 2 days later, on August 16, Pete Best was fired and Ringo became an official Beatle. His first show with the band was on August 18 at Hume Hall in Birkenhead. When Ringo Starr took over as the Beatles' drummer in August 1962, fans of Pete Best were furious at their first official gig with Ringo. The crowd chanted, "Pete!" The backlash was even worse at the Cavern Club, where half of the audience openly protested. Things got so bad that George Harrison was punched in the eye later that same day and was even hit by a bus. The anger was high, but the Beatles stood their ground. George and Paul had pushed for Ringo because he was a better drummer, and John was on board as well. Ringo had filled in for Pete before and impressed the group with his skill and dependability. As time went on, the protest died down, and fans started to notice what Ringo was doing. Ringo's steady drumming anchored the band's shift into folk rock, and his rhythms on Norwegian Wood blended with the band's sound. He wasn't flashy, but his rock-solid playing gave the Beatles a new level of confidence. Even Pete Best, decades later, said the decision was the right one. It was a turning point with Ringo. The band had its final lineup, and their rise to global fame was unstoppable. As the Beatles changed, so did Ringo's role on Rubber Soul, 1965. His steady drumming anchored the band's transition into folk rock, and his rhythms on Norwegian Wood blended Ringo's playing got even more experimental on Revolver, 1966. His hypnotic drum pattern on Tomorrow Never Knows was unlike anything he'd done before. And of course, Yellow Submarine showed off his playful side, making him even more popular with fans. By Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 1967, one of the best albums of all time, Ringo had fully cemented his place in the band's sound. His drumming on With a Little Help from My Friends was simple but effective. He wasn't just the drummer anymore, he was an important part of the band's identity. Ringo didn't sing much, but when he did, it was memorable. Yellow Submarine was written especially for his voice. It was lighthearted and fun, just like him. It became an anthem loved by fans of all ages. Then came My Friends, a song written to fit his vocal style. His voice wasn't technically impressive. Sincerity made the song timeless, and both tracks became fan favorites, showing that Ringo was more than just the guy behind the drums. By the late 1960s, the Beatles were not the same band they had been in the early years. The unity that had defined their early years was gone, and creative differences, personal tensions, and outside influences were tearing them apart. Paul McCartney wanted to keep the band focused on structured pop melodies, while John Lennon was moving toward experimental music with the help of Yoko Ono. George Harrison had become a great songwriter with songs like Something and Here Comes the Sun, but he often felt like he wasn't getting enough attention. Yoko Ono's presence in the studio made things worse. Starting in 1968, she was always by Lennon's side, even during recording sessions. The band had never let outsiders in before, so this was a big change. Ono contributed creatively, and Lennon took her ideas seriously, but the others thought she was getting in the way. Harrison also struggled with the change. His friendship with Lennon wasn't the same anymore. Things came to a head during the White Album sessions in 1968. The mood in the studio was tense, and everyone felt alone. Ringo Starr took it the hardest. He thought the others were closer to each other than they were to him, but in reality, they all felt the same way. McCartney was especially critical of Ringo's drumming, even taking over in the USSR. Ringo felt it deeply. He later said he felt unloved and left behind while the others got closer, and it got so bad that he quit the band. While the rest of the Beatles struggled without him, Ringo ran away to Sardinia, where he found inspiration and wrote Octopus's Garden, a song that would later be released on Abbey Road. Back in London, the band realized how much they missed him and sent him telegrams calling him the best rock and roll drummer in the world and even decorated his drum kit with flowers. 2 weeks later, he came back, but the band's unity was getting worse. When he walked into the studio on September 4, George Harrison had put flowers on his drum kit to say, "Welcome back." It was a rare act of kindness during a hard time, but the problems hadn't gone away. The band's personal relationships had changed. Lennon was becoming more distant, and his heroin use made things worse. Arguments were common, and Abbey Road engineers were sometimes asked to leave the room so the band could fight. In private, by September 1969, Lennon had already made up his mind. He told the others he was leaving the band and calling it a divorce, but their business manager, Alan Clean, told him to keep it quiet because they needed to settle some money matters first, and an official breakup could make things more difficult for a while. The public still saw them as the Beatles, but behind closed doors they were already broken up. Ringo took the breakup hard. He had always been the calm one and the steady presence in the group. Now even he felt lost. During the last few years he had tried to keep the peace. Business disagreements made things even worse. McCartney wanted Linda Eastman's father to manage the band, while Lennon wanted Alan Clean. No one was willing to give in, and by 1970, the Beatles were over. Each member went their own way. For Ringo, this meant proving he could stand on his own. But instead of going into rock music, he took a different path with his first album, Sentimental Journey, which came out on March 27, 1970. This wasn't a typical album. As a child, he heard a lot of old standards from the 1940S and 1950S in Liverpool. He wanted to make something personal that his mother and family would enjoy. George Martin produced the album and brought in famous arrangers like Quincy Jones and Paul McCartney's father-in-law, Lee Eastman. The cover showed Ringo standing outside of a Liverpool pub as a nod to his roots. Critics weren't sure what to think. Some called it charming, others found it confusing. But the album did well despite the mixed reviews. It didn't do very well, but it showed that Ringo was willing to take risks. Later that same year, in October 1970, he did something even more risky. He released his second solo album, Bokus of Blues, which was all country music. It was recorded in Nashville in just 2 days with producer Pete Drake and a group of top country musicians. The title track, which was written by Buzz Rabin, went to #1 in both the U.S. and Germany. Critics praised Ringo's laid-back style, and Cashbox called it a fine country single. The album didn't do very well, but it showed another side of him. He wasn't just the drummer for the Beatles. He was an artist who loved exploring any kind of music. His big break came when he released It Don't Come Easy in April 1971. It was his first major solo hit. He co-wrote the song with George Harrison, though Harrison wasn't officially credited. The lyrics, which were about trust and persistence, felt very personal to Ringo. Harrison produced the song and added his signature slide guitar, giving it a polished but raw sound. It had a heartfelt sound and reached #1 in Canada. It did better than singles by his former bandmates at the time. Next was Photograph, which came out in October 1973. Ringo and Harrison wrote it together, making it one of Ringo's most emotional songs. The lyrics were about lost love, and the song's rich production made it unforgettable. It went to #1 in the US and Canada and made the top 10 in the UK that same year. He had another #1 hit with You're 16 was a cover of a 1960 Johnny Burnett song that came out in December 1973 and became a huge hit in early 1974. The music video, which starred Carrie Fisher as Ringo's love interest, added a fun touch. By this time, it was clear that Ringo Starr was a solo star. His 1973 album Ringo was a big part of this success. It was his most successful solo project and felt like a reunion of the Beatles. John Lennon wrote "I'm the Greatest" just for Ringo, and George Harrison played guitar. Although he wasn't in the studio at the same time as the others, Paul McCartney co-wrote and performed on 6. The album was produced by Richard Perry and featured a great lineup of musicians, including Mark Bolan, Billy Preston, Harry Nilsson, and members of the band. It went to number 2 in the U.S. and had 2 huge hits, Photograph and You're 16. Critics praised Ringo's personality and the album's mix of rock, pop, and heartfelt ballads. It was one of the biggest successes any former Beatle had. Ringo wasn't just making music after the band broke up, he also started acting. In 1970, he co-starred with Peter Sears in The Magic Christian, a dark comedy about greed and corruption based on a book by Terry Southern. The film had a surreal style and cameos from stars like Raquel Welch and Christopher Lee. Ringo played Youngman Grand, the adopted son of a billionaire played by Sellers. The film got mixed reviews, but Ringo's performance was praised. In 1981, he played the lead role in Caveman, a slapstick comedy. Critics didn't love the prehistoric comedy in which he played Atuk, a small but smart caveman who challenges the rude leader of his tribe. The movie had over-the-top humor, a made-up caveman language, and even stop-motion dinosaurs, but it became a cult favorite over time, and more importantly, it changed Ringo's life in a personal way. While filming, he met actress Barbara Bach, and the two fell in love and got married soon after. After the Beatles broke up in 1970, Ringo's life took a dark turn. Success was still there, but so he wasn't just drinking a few drinks, he was lost in a world of excess, spending most nights in clubs and barely remembering the performances he gave. Marijuana and cocaine were also part of the mix, and he later admitted that he was living in a haze and couldn't remember whole events like a show he played with the Beach Boys in Washington, D.C. At home, things weren't any better. His marriage to Maureen Cox had lasted 10 years, but Ringo and Maureen got married when she was 18 years old, and they had 3 children together. But his lifestyle tore them apart. He was cheating on his wife, missing work, and getting more and more addicted to drugs. Then something even stranger happened. George Harrison, Maureen's close friend and former bandmate, fell in love with her. It happened at a dinner party in the middle of the night, and George told everyone about it. It wasn't just an awkward moment, it was the start of an affair. Not only was Ringo devastated, but he didn't lose it. He just said, "Better you than someone we don't know." Harrison's wife, Pattie Boyd, was also deeply hurt. She later dealt with her grief in her own way by returning to modeling and having an affair of her own. Even after the divorce, Ringo's drinking got worse. He joined the Hollywood Vampires, a notorious drinking club where Alice Cooper, Keith Moon, and other rock stars lived for drinking. When musicians started partying together, it turned into something dangerous. Ringo later admitted that they had stopped being musicians who used drugs and had become junkies who dabbled in music. His career was still going well, but his addiction was taking over. Then, in 1980, everything changed again. He met Barbara Bach on the set of Caveman, a comedy in which he played a clumsy, prehistoric man. At first, they were just co-stars, but by the end of filming, their relationship had turned into something more. They fell in love quickly and got married in April 1981. It seemed like a fresh start, but both of them were still addicted to drugs and alcohol. Ringo would start his day with champagne and spend the rest of the day freebasing cocaine. Barbara also struggled with substance abuse. Their home turned into a mess. Bach's daughter later said she often hid in books because her mother and stepfather were too drunk to be there with her. It wasn't just self-destruction anymore. It was hurting others. Ringo lost control one night while high and drunk, destroying parts of their home. That wasn't all. He then attacked Barbara so violently that their staff thought she might not make it. That moment changed everything they knew. They couldn't keep going like this. If they didn't stop, one of them might not make it. That year, they went to the Sierra Tucson Rehabilitation Clinic in Arizona, which was the first time Ringo had really tried to get clean. He did the 6-week program. It was hard, but it worked. He later said that staying sober was still hard for him, and there were nights when he had to hold on to the edges of his drum seat after shows to fight the urge to drink, but he stayed strong. In 1989, Ringo did something brave that would change his career forever. He formed the All-Star Band, a group unlike any other. The idea came from producer David Fishoff, who wanted to make a band where every musician on stage was a star in their own right. The first lineup was full of famous musicians like Joe Walsh from the Eagles, Niels Lofgren from Crazy Horse, Dr. John, Billy Preston, Rick Dano, Levon Helm from the band, and Clarence Clemens from the East Street Band. Each musician brought their own hits to the set list, making every show a mix of classic rock, soul, and pop. What made the All-Star Band unique was that its lineup changed every tour, which kept the concerts fresh and exciting. Later on, musicians like Todd Rundgren, Burton Cummings from the Guess Who, and Randy Newman joined the band. Bachman from Bachman-Turner Overdrive joined the band. The setlist always included Ringo's solo hits and classic Beatles songs, as well as songs from each band member's catalog. Fans could hear everything from Joe Walsh's Life in the Fast Lane to It Don't Come Easy at the same show, which made every concert feel like a once-in-a-lifetime event. The All-Star Band didn't just bring Ringo back into the spotlight, it also brought a new way of performing, where legends from different bands shared the stage as equals. The concerts were a huge hit all over the world, with sold-out shows in Japan, Europe, and the US. In 1998, Ringo was the first Beatle to perform in Russia. As the years went by, new musicians like Peter Frampton, Jack Bruce from Cream, Sheila E., Steve Lather from Toto, and Colin Hay from Men at Work joined the band at different times. Even in 2024, the lineup kept changing with Hamish Stewart from Average White Band and Buck Johnson from Aerosmith. The concerts had a special energy that kept people coming back for more. Many venues like Humphreys by the Bay in San Diego became regular stops for Ringo's concerts because the atmosphere was always intimate, making it feel like a personal experience rather than just another show. Ringo's message of peace and love made every performance more than just music. It became a celebration of the past and present, bringing together generations of fans. In 2001, Ringo released Ringo Starr and His All-Star Band: The Anthology, a 3-CD collection of live recordings from multiple tours between 1989 and 2000. Ringo performing hits like Photograph and With a Little Help from My Friends. The album also featured songs by his bandmates such as Life in the Fast Lane by Joe Walsh and Will It Go Round in Circles by Billy Preston. A rare recording of Peter Frampton singing Norwegian Wood added something extra. The collection didn't become a commercial hit, but it wasn't about sales. It was a tribute to the music and the friendships that made the All-Star Band so special. During his time with the Beatles, John Lennon and Paul McCartney were known for writing songs, but Ringo was making drum parts that changed the sound of rock music. He focused on feel over complexity, making sure that each song had exactly what it needed. His drumming on Rain was the first time that backward tape loops were used, and his work on A Day in the Life showed how subtle fills could change the whole mood of a song. His groove on Come Together became one of the most famous. Phil Collins called him one of the greatest drummers of all time, and Dave Grohl praised how his simple beats could be so memorable. In 2015, Ringo was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame as a solo artist, which is a rare honor for a drummer. Ringo Starr has always been known as the laid-back Beatle, but his life has been full of problems and controversies that most people don't talk about. In January 2008, he said something that turned people in his hometown against him. When asked if he missed anything about Liverpool on the Jonathan Ross show, he said without hesitation, "No." The timing could not have been worse. Just days before, he had helped start Liverpool's celebrations as the European capital of culture. Many people in the city felt betrayed. They had always seen him as one of their own, and now it seemed like he had turned his back on them. The anger wasn't just online or in the newspapers. In April 2008, vandals destroyed a topiary sculpture of the Beatles that had been put up at Liverpool's South Parkway Transport Exchange. The sculpture was by Italian artist Franco Coville and showed all 4 band members, but only Ringo's head was stolen. It had been damaged before when someone tried to squash Ringo's head, but this time the thieves made sure it was gone. Despite the backlash, Ringo never apologized for what he said. In fact, his silence made things worse. Ringo has talked about the darker side of his personal life. By the late 1960s and 1970s, fame had taken a toll on him. He struggled with alcoholism and wasn't present in the lives of his children very often. His first marriage to Maureen Cox ended in 1975 when their oldest child was 9 and their youngest was 5. After the divorce, Ringo moved to Los Angeles while Maureen stayed in the UK to raise their children alone. Years later, in the late 1990s, he admitted to even in his worst years, Ringo abused his second wife Barbara Bach physically while he was drunk. The next morning, he couldn't even remember what had happened. That's when things changed. He and Bach went to rehab together, and from then on, he made sobriety his top priority. He worked to fix his relationship with his kids and rebuild the trust he had broken. While John Lennon's past behavior has been widely talked about, Ringo's confessions have been less public. They show that even the most loved celebrities have demons they have to fight. Ringo has also come very close to death. In April 1979, he had a medical emergency that could have killed him. He had peritonitis as a child, and the condition came back decades later. The pain was unbearable, and he was rushed to Princess Grace Hospital in Monte Carlo on April 28th. There, doctors performed emergency surgery and removed several feet of damaged intestine. It was a close call that most people would have needed months to recover from. 3 weeks after surgery, Ringo went to Eric Clapton's wedding with Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and others. His health scare should have been the worst thing that happened to him that year, but it wasn't. On November 28, 1979, a fire broke out in his Hollywood home, destroying many items of Beatles memorabilia. It was a reminder of how quickly things could change. The illness and the fire made him reevaluate his life, and he realized he needed to focus on his health instead of the wild lifestyle he had been living. Years